General Hospital spoilers for the next 2 weeks, August 11th to August 22nd reveal that Jason had been operating in the shadows for weeks, moving carefully through the network of whispers. Hidden records, and coded exchanges that all seemed to converge on the same name, 5 Poppies. For a long time, he didn't have enough to act. There were too many unanswered questions. Too many risks of walking into a trap without knowing exactly who was pulling the strings. But the last few days had changed everything. A handful of seemingly minor discoveries, an intercepted communication, a hidden transfer of funds, and a surveillance image that had clearly been meant to stay buried, had shifted the entire equation. The pieces fit together with an uncomfortable clarity, all pointing to the fact that Britt was there, trapped in a dangerous web, and the window to reach her was closing fast. What had once been a vague suspicion had hardened into certainty. The threads that linked Britt to 5 Poppies were no longer circumstantial, they were solid, undeniable, and urgent. The resort, long rumored to be a cover for something far more sinister, was no longer just a place on Jason's map, it was a ticking time bomb. The secrecy surrounding it had started to fracture, with small but telling leaks making their way into the underground channels Jason trusted. Each leak revealed a different angle, illicit experiments, forced loyalties, and power struggles that had nothing to do with the image of luxury that 5 Poppies projected to the outside world. Jason had always been a man who relied on patience as much as precision. But patience now felt like a liability. There was a shift happening inside 5 Poppies, an adjustment in plans that suggested the people in control were moving faster, making new calculations, and tightening their grip. Whatever was happening there was no longer stable, it was volatile, and that volatility was dangerous for anyone trapped inside. Britt, whether by choice or by force, was caught in the middle of it. The intelligence Jason had gathered confirmed not only her presence but also her involvement in something high stakes. Something she might not be able to walk away from on her own. The changes inside the resort's operations were subtle but significant. Security protocols had been altered. Supply shipments were being redirected, and certain staff members had vanished without explanation. Jason understood the language of organized secrecy. These were the signs of a system in flux. A place recalibrating its priorities in real time. That kind of instability could mean one of two things: either they were preparing for a major move, or they were reacting to a threat they hadn't anticipated. In either case, Britt's safety was hanging by a thread, and Jason couldn't afford to miscalculate. He replayed the data over and over in his mind, the coded messages intercepted between mid-level handlers, the satellite images showing restricted zones expanding on the property. The report from an off-the-books contact who had overheard Britt's name during a tense meeting. These weren't random coincidences. They were part of a pattern. One that suggested the walls were closing in on her. Every day that passed without action was another day the people at 5 Poppies had to consolidate their control and cut off any chance of extraction. There was also the matter of the adjustments that his sources kept mentioning. The word came up again and again in intercepted conversations, adjustments to schedules, to security details, to the allocation of certain high-value assets. Jason knew enough to understand that when people like this talked about assets, they didn't just mean money or materials. They meant people. The tone of those conversations had shifted in recent days, becoming sharper, more urgent. Someone inside 5 Poppies had changed the plan, and whatever that change was, it was pushing events toward a breaking point. Jason wasn't blind to the risks. Going in now meant walking into a fortified location without a clear picture of every player involved. But he also knew that waiting would mean losing the only chance to get Britt out alive. The tension between those two realities was something he'd lived with before, but this time felt different. This wasn't just a mission, it was personal. He had been down this road with Britt once, thinking she was lost to him, only to find out she was still alive. He wasn't going to let her slip away again. Not when he finally had the means to act. His mind kept circling back to one question: why had they kept her there this long? If Britt was just a liability, they could have eliminated her quietly. The fact that they hadn't meant she had value to them, knowledge, skills, or leverage that made her worth holding on to. That also meant that when she was no longer useful, the people controlling her wouldn't hesitate to remove her permanently. The adjustments Jason had uncovered could very well be the beginning of that process. The clock was ticking, and Jason felt it in every decision he made. He began to refine his plan with the kind of cold precision that had kept him alive through countless missions. Entry points were mapped. Contingencies were built in, and extraction routes were layered with backups. He was going in under the radar, no official support, no margin for error. Every move would have to be executed perfectly, because any misstep would not only blow his cover but also put Britt directly in the line of fire. Even as he prepared, he couldn't shake the sense that this mission was about more than just one rescue. The deeper he dug into the operations at Five Poppies, the more it became clear that uncovering their secrets could have far-reaching consequences beyond Port Charles. There were hints of a network that extended into places Jason hadn't even considered yet, with connections that could shift the balance of power in ways he couldn't fully predict. Saving Britt might be the first step, but it wouldn't be the last. Still, the mission had to start with her. Every scrap of evidence he'd gathered told him that her situation was deteriorating. She was surrounded by people whose loyalties were shifting, whose actions were increasingly unpredictable. That kind of environment could turn lethal without warning. Jason wasn't going to wait for that moment. He had the proof he needed, the plan he trusted, and the resolve to see it through. The time for watching and waiting was over. The secrets of Five Poppies were beginning to unravel, and Jason was ready to pull the thread until the entire fabric came apart. But first, he had to reach Britt, and he had to do it before the new calculations being made inside those walls sealed her fate forever. The tension between Curtis and Drew was no longer a quiet undercurrent, it had become a steady, relentless pulse that seemed to echo through every corner of Port Charles. What had begun as strategic differences and subtle mistrust had now escalated into open hostility, with each man calculating his next move while keeping a wary eye on the other. In the middle of this growing divide stood Stella, who found herself caught between conflicting loyalties and mounting dangers. The newest developments had shifted the balance once again, creating adjustments in both alliances and strategies that no one had fully anticipated. For Stella, the storm was no longer on the horizon, it was already breaking over her. The latest revelations had placed her directly in the path of a volatile conflict that was spinning further out of control by the hour. Whispers of her involvement in questionable dealings had started to circulate, and what had once been small, containable rumors were now evolving into something far more threatening. The situation around her was no longer just a matter of loyalty or reputation, it was about survival. Every choice she made now had the potential to inflame the fragile truce between Curtis and Drew. And the wrong move could tip the scales toward outright war. The adjustments happening behind the scenes were subtle but decisive. Curtis, sensing a shift in Drew's tactics, had begun to tighten his circle, scrutinizing every ally for signs of wavering loyalty. Drew, in turn, was recalibrating his approach, probing for weaknesses in Curtis's position while expanding his influence in ways that could corner him. Stella was painfully aware that she had become a pressure point in their game, a person both sides might try to control or eliminate, depending on how the winds shifted. This was not just about business rivalries or personal grudges anymore. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of impending collision, as if the smallest spark could set off a chain reaction no one could contain. Stella's name was already being whispered in the wrong conversations. Her movements watched more closely than she realized. The danger was no longer hypothetical, it was immediate, creeping closer with each passing day. The new troubles surrounding her were proof that whatever was brewing between Curtis and Drew was now spilling over into every facet of her life, threatening to pull her into depths she might not escape. And yet, Stella understood that standing still was no longer an option. The adjustments being made on all sides were reshaping the battlefield, and if she didn't adapt quickly, she would be consumed by it. The stakes were no longer about influence or control, they were about survival in a conflict that had already gone further than anyone intended, with no sign of slowing down. The animosity between Sunny and Sidwell had always simmered beneath the surface, an unspoken rivalry built on mutual distrust and conflicting ambitions. But lately, that quiet, calculated hostility had shifted into something far more volatile. The tension was no longer something either man could keep contained behind closed doors. It was bleeding into every conversation. Every maneuver, every whispered warning that passed through their respective networks. What had once been a strategic standoff was now on a steady incline toward open war. Fueled in no small part by Sidwell's unrelenting determination to punish Sonny for one particular transgression, his role in the abduction of Marco. The Marco incident was more than just a point of contention between them, it was the spark that had ignited this new and dangerous escalation. For Sonny, the abduction had been a tactical play. An act meant to gain leverage and force certain pieces on the board to move in his favor. In his mind, it was part of the cost of doing business in a world where loyalty was never guaranteed and control was a fragile illusion. But for Sidwell, it had been something far more personal, a calculated insult, a direct challenge to his authority, and an attack that demanded repayment in full. It was the kind of affront that couldn't be settled with a conversation or a subtle act of retaliation. This, in Sidwell's eyes, was a wound that could only be healed by dismantling Sonny piece by piece. And Sidwell had wasted no time in setting that plan into motion. His actions in recent weeks were a study in precision, each move carefully chosen to undermine Sonny's stability without giving away the full scope of his intentions. He was no longer merely consolidating his own resources, he was expanding them. Every new alliance he formed, every quiet acquisition of influence in Sonny's world, was a deliberate step toward his goal. Sidwell was building something larger than a personal vendetta. He was reshaping the power structure itself, creating a network that could not only strike at Sonny but also withstand any counterattack Sonny might mount. The expansion was subtle at first, changes in distribution routes, whispers about new financial backers, rumors that Sidwell was buying his way into circles Sonny had long controlled. But as the weeks passed, those subtle shifts became impossible to ignore. Entire neighborhoods that had once answered to Sonny's authority began to show signs of divided loyalty. Certain figures who had been steadfast in their allegiance were now hesitant, keeping their options open. Sidwell wasn't just chipping away at Sonny's empire, he was poisoning the foundation, making Sonny question who he could trust. This was where the real danger lay. Sidwell understood that the fastest way to weaken an enemy wasn't always through direct confrontation, it was through isolation. And he was succeeding. By expanding his reach, he was drawing Sonny into a position where every move felt like a gamble. If Sonny acted too aggressively, he risked alienating the allies he still had. If he moved too cautiously, he gave Sidwell more time to cement his control. It was a slow, grinding game, and Sidwell was playing it with the patience of someone who knew that time was on his side. But Sidwell wasn't working alone. His expansion came with a network of new players, some known, some hidden, who were willing to back his campaign against Sonny for their own reasons. Some sought revenge of their own, others wanted a share of the influence Sonny had held for years. Together, they formed a dangerous coalition. One that could move quickly when the time came to strike. This wasn't just about hurting Sonny, it was about replacing him. About rewriting the balance of power in a way that would leave no room for him to recover. For Sonny, the realization that Sidwell's expansion was more than just a series of isolated power grabs came slowly but definitively. Each intelligence report, each warning from trusted informants, painted a clearer picture. Sidwell was adjusting his approach, shifting from targeted retaliation to full-scale destabilization. The abduction of Marco had set this in motion. But now it was evolving into something even more dangerous, a campaign designed to strip Sonny of everything he valued, from his influence to his ability to protect those closest to him. This shift, the adjustment, in Sidwell's strategy, was perhaps the most alarming part of all. It meant Sidwell had stopped thinking like a man seeking justice and started thinking like a man building an empire. He was no longer content to hurt Sonny, he wanted to replace him entirely. To make the very mention of Sonny's name a relic of a past that no longer mattered. That kind of ambition was far harder to counter. Because it wasn't fueled by emotion alone, it was backed by calculated, strategic thinking. And yet, the personal element was still there, burning like a fuse beneath everything Sidwell did. His desire to avenge Marco's abduction gave his actions a relentless edge. It kept him moving forward, unwilling to settle for half measures or compromises. Every victory he won, no matter how small, was a step toward that ultimate reckoning he envisioned. And Sonny knew it. He could feel the walls closing in. Not just from Sidwell's direct maneuvers but from the way the landscape around him was shifting. Friends were becoming cautious, deals were stalling. And the once clear lines of loyalty were blurring into shades of uncertainty. The truth was, Sonny was facing a fight on multiple fronts, and Sidwell was making sure of it. By stretching the conflict into every corner of Sonny's world, Sidwell was forcing him to spread his resources thin, to make difficult choices about which battles to fight and which to let go. In doing so, Sidwell was testing Sonny's limits, waiting for the moment when one bad decision would send everything tumbling down. It was a dangerous game, and both men knew it couldn't last forever. The expansion of Sidwell's reach was only the beginning. The real confrontation, the one that would decide who stood and who fell, was still coming. But each passing day, each calculated adjustment in Sidwell's strategy, brought it closer. The longer this went on, the clearer it became that there would be no easy resolution. The history between them was too deep. The grievances too personal, and the stakes too high. When that final collision came, it wouldn't just be about Marco anymore. It would be about everything: control, legacy, survival. And both men were preparing for it in their own way, adjusting their moves, shoring up their positions, knowing that when the moment arrived, there would be no turning back. In this game, there could be only one outcome, one man standing, and the other erased from the board entirely. And somewhere in the distance, both Sonny and Sidwell could already hear the clock ticking. Gio had been circling the decision for days, weighing every risk, measuring every potential consequence, but deep down he knew there would be no turning back once he moved. Dalton's lab wasn't just another location on the map, it was a fortified stronghold of secrets, a place where whispers of illegal research, covert experiments, and encrypted files had drawn the interest of far too many dangerous people. The rumors surrounding the lab had been easy to dismiss in the beginning, but the deeper Gio dug, the more undeniable they became. And then, somewhere in the middle of those sleepless nights spent gathering intel and piecing together fragments of evidence, Emma became part of the equation. Not just as a partner in strategy, but as someone whose presence altered his every choice. The bond between them had started innocently enough. Two people working on the same side of a much larger fight, each driven by personal reasons they rarely spoke about. But that bond had deepened in ways that caught them both off guard, making every decision carry more weight, every risk feel sharper. When Gio first mentioned the idea of breaking into Dalton's lab, Emma's reaction had been predictable: concern, questions. A cautious reminder that this was not the kind of mission you walked away from clean. But even as she listed the dangers, there had been a flicker in her eyes. A spark of shared conviction that told him she would follow him if he decided to go through with it. By the time they started mapping the lab's perimeter, her hesitation was gone. She was in. Fully and without compromise, and that was when Dante and Anna's unease began to escalate. For them, this wasn't just about operational safety or the potential fallout from a failed mission, it was about watching two people they cared for allow emotion to guide their actions in a high-stakes game where emotion could be fatal. Dante could see it in the way Gio looked at Emma now, the way his plans unconsciously shifted to protect her even at the cost of efficiency. Anna recognized it too. Because she'd seen it before, in others, in herself. The mix of adrenaline, danger, and intimacy was intoxicating, but it clouded judgment. Restricted access to certain wings of the lab, personnel shifts that didn't match his usual patterns. To Gio, these changes were confirmation that Dalton was hiding something important. Perhaps even anticipating an intrusion. But instead of deterring him, they only solidified his resolve. If Dalton was locking things down, it meant whatever was inside was valuable, and potentially explosive if revealed. Emma, meanwhile, was wrestling with her own inner conflict. she knew the mission was dangerous. That the odds of a clean escape were slim. Yet her loyalty to Gio overrode her doubts. It wasn't just about supporting him, it was about being part of something bigger. About proving to herself that she could stand in the fire and not flinch. That resolve, though admirable, was exactly what made Dante and Anna's concern edge toward outright alarm. They had seen too many missions go sideways when personal ties got tangled up with operational objectives. The night before the planned break-in, tensions hit a breaking point. Dante confronted Gio, warning him that his judgment was compromised, that this wasn't the kind of mission where you could afford to think with your heart. Anna spoke to Emma in quieter tones, trying to draw out the doubts she knew had to be there, hoping to sway her without making her feel cornered. But their words, though well-intentioned, only strengthened the young pair's resolve. The more they were told it couldn't be done, the more determined they became to prove it could. Behind all of this was the knowledge that Dalton's lab wasn't just dangerous because of what was inside, it was dangerous because of who wanted what was inside. Multiple factions had eyes on that location, each with their own reasons for wanting Dalton's secrets, and each fully capable of eliminating anyone who got in their way. A successful break-in could bring the truth to light, but it could also put Gio and Emma on the radar of enemies they had no idea existed yet. The adjustments Dalton had made to his security were not random. They were part of a broader shift. One that indicated he was preparing for something, either a purge of whatever he was hiding or a counterstrike against those who might try to expose him. That was the wild card Gio and Emma were walking into, the possibility that Dalton wasn't simply defending his territory, but setting a trap for anyone reckless enough to challenge him. As the hours ticked down to the moment of action, the tension was palpable. Gio and Emma were locked in, their plan mapped out with meticulous detail. But Dante and Anna were still circling them like sentinels, trying to find any last crack in their determination. It wasn't just professional responsibility driving them, it was fear. Fear of watching two people they cared for walk into something that could change them forever, if it didn't destroy them outright. And yet, nothing would stop the inevitable. When Gio slipped into the shadows with Emma at his side, they weren't just breaking into a lab, they were crossing a threshold. Whatever they found inside would not only test their skills and their resolve but would also test the bond they had built in the heat of danger. And in the back of their minds, they knew Dante and Anna were right about one thing: love and loyalty could be powerful forces, but in the wrong place, at the wrong time. They could be just as dangerous as any enemy waiting in the dark. The mission into Dalton's lab would not just be another operation. It would be the moment where all the adjustments, the shifts in Dalton's defenses, the changes in their own relationship, and the escalating fears of those trying to protect them, collided. And once that collision happened, there would be no going back.